In late 2021, something strange was happening in electronics stores across the globe. Row after row of shelves where graphics cards should have been sitting stood completely empty. And if you were lucky enough to find one, you'd be confronted with a price tag that seemed like a cruel joke. Graphics cards with a suggested retail price of $500 were selling for an astonishing $2,000. This wasn't just a simple case of greed or bad luck. What we witnessed during the great GPU shortage of 2020-2022 was one of the most dramatic examples of market forces at work in recent memory. At its peak, graphics cards were selling for up to 300% above their manufacturer's suggested retail price, creating a $20 billion secondary market almost overnight. But here's what makes this story truly fascinating. The GPU shortage wasn't an isolated incident. It was just one example of a pattern we've seen repeated throughout history, from Dutch tulip bulbs in 1637 to concert tickets today. By reverse engineering exactly what happened with graphics cards, why they became so scarce, how prices spiraled out of control, and what finally brought them back to earth, we can uncover the hidden forces that control virtually every price in our modern economy. Think about it. Why do some concert tickets sell for 10 times their face value while others go unsold? Why did toilet paper disappear from shelves during the pandemic while other paper products remained available? And why do new gaming consoles become impossible to find every holiday season? The answer lies in understanding the delicate dance between supply and demand, a force so fundamental to our economy that once you learn to spot its patterns, you'll never look at a price tag the same way again. The great GPU shortage of 2020-2022 isn't just a story about computer parts. It's a window into how markets really work, and more importantly, how they sometimes spectacularly fail. When prices spike dramatically, our first instinct is to look for someone to blame. During the GPU shortage, online forums buzzed with accusations. Greedy manufacturers are gouging us. Scalpers are buying everything. Retailers are hoarding inventory. These explanations feel satisfying because they give us a clear villain, but they fall apart under closer inspection. Take the corporate greed explanation. If GPU manufacturers like Nvidia and AMD could simply charge whatever they wanted, why weren't graphics cards always selling for $2,000? What changed in 2020 that suddenly made charging 300% more possible? And why did prices eventually come back down? Did companies suddenly become less greedy? The "it's all scalpers' fault" argument has similar holes. Yes, scalpers were buying up available stock and reselling at higher prices. But scalpers exist in every market. They buy concert tickets, sneakers, gaming consoles, and countless other products. Yet most of these items don't see their prices quadruple. Even the retailers are hoarding inventory theory doesn't hold up. Major retailers like Best Buy and Micro Center implemented strict purchase limits, often 1 GPU per customer. They live-streamed their inventory restocks to prove transparency. Despite these measures, prices remained sky-high and shelves remained empty. What we're seeing here is the difference between proximate causes and root causes. Scalpers, retailers, and manufacturers weren't creating the conditions that made extreme prices possible. They were responding to those conditions. To understand what really drove the GPU shortage, we need to peel back these surface-level explanations and look deeper. Think of it like diagnosing an illness. A fever isn't the disease, it's a symptom. High prices aren't the problem. They're a signal that something fundamental has changed in the relationship between supply and demand. Just as a doctor needs to look past surface symptoms to find the underlying condition, we need to dig deeper to understand what really causes prices to spiral out of control. Over the next few minutes, we're going to peel back 3 layers of the GPU shortage: the trigger events that started it, the feedback loops that amplified it, and the market forces that eventually resolved it. By understanding how these layers interact, we'll develop a framework for understanding not just why graphics cards became so expensive, but why any product can suddenly see its price skyrocket or plummet. To understand why GPU prices spiraled so dramatically, we first need to understand what was driving demand. And in 2020, it wasn't just one factor. It was a perfect storm. First, the pandemic locked millions of people at home, creating an unprecedented boom in gaming. Steam, the largest PC gaming platform, saw its concurrent users jump from 16 million in early 2020 to over 24 million by year's end. Between January 2020 and November 2021, the price of Ethereum, a cryptocurrency that could be profitably mined using graphics cards, rose from $130 to over $4,800. Suddenly, a $500 graphics card could generate $15 to $20 per day in mining revenue. Basic math made the decision simple. Even at $2,000, a GPU could pay for itself in a few months. This created what economists call inelastic demand. People became willing to pay almost any price because the card would eventually pay for itself. This dynamic perfectly illustrates a fundamental concept in economics: the demand curve. Typically, as prices rise, fewer people are willing to buy. But during the GPU shortage, we saw something unusual. When prices tripled or quadrupled, demand didn't drop significantly. The crypto mining profit potential meant that even at $2,000, these cards were still seen as worth it by many buyers. We can see this same principle at work in concert ticket pricing. When Taylor Swift announced her Eras Tour, tickets with a face value of $449 were reselling for over $4,000. But here's the crucial insight: increased demand alone doesn't guarantee higher prices. In fact, many products see huge demand spikes without significant price increases. When a new iPhone launches, demand is enormous, but Apple doesn't charge $4,000. They maintain stable pricing and manage demand through pre-orders and controlled distribution. The key difference is supply. Demand tells us how much people want something and what they're willing to pay. But to understand why prices actually rise, we need to look at the supply side of the equation. The demand spike from gaming and crypto mining collided with something else: a global semiconductor shortage that would make it nearly impossible to increase production to meet this surge in demand. And that's where our story takes an even more interesting turn, because while demand was highly visible, the supply chain issues were about to reveal vulnerabilities in our global manufacturing system that almost no one saw coming. When demand for GPUs skyrocketed in 2020, manufacturers couldn't simply flip a switch to make more. The reason reveals a fascinating truth about modern manufacturing. Supply chains are optimized for efficiency, not flexibility. At the heart of every GPU is a semiconductor chip that requires some of the most sophisticated manufacturing processes humans have ever developed. These chips are produced in specialized facilities called fabs, which cost upwards of $20 billion to build and take 3 to 5 years to construct. The machines inside these fabs are so precise that they can be disrupted by the slightest vibration. Even distant earthquakes can affect production. This inflexibility in semiconductor manufacturing creates what economists call inelastic supply. Even when prices rise dramatically, producers can't quickly increase production. We saw this same principle at work during the great toilet paper shortage of 2020. When panic buying stripped shelves bare, manufacturers couldn't simply double production because their machines were already running at maximum capacity. They faced what's known as a hard supply constraint. GPUs faced multiple supply constraints simultaneously. First, semiconductor fabs were already running at nearly 100% capacity when the pandemic hit. Then COVID-19 safety measures reduced production efficiency just as demand was spiking. Meanwhile, global shipping disruptions meant that even the GPUs that were being produced couldn't reach stores efficiently. Think of it like a highway system. If traffic, demand, suddenly doubles, you can't just build new lanes overnight. The supply of road capacity is relatively fixed in the short term, no matter how badly drivers want to get somewhere. When supply is highly inelastic, can't easily increase, and demand becomes highly inelastic, people willing to pay almost any price, the result is dramatic price increases. It's simple mathematics. If 1,000 people are willing to pay $2,000 for a GPU, but only 300 GPUs are available, prices will rise until demand drops to match the available supply. The numbers tell the story. Semiconductor manufacturing capacity typically increases by only 4 to 6% per year. But during the pandemic, demand for GPUs increased by over 40%. This mismatch between highly elastic demand and highly inelastic supply created the perfect conditions for extreme price spikes. What makes this even more interesting is that these supply constraints weren't evenly distributed. While GPU production was severely limited, manufacturers of simpler chips could more easily increase production. This explains why we saw extreme shortages in some products, GPUs, new cars, but not others, keyboards, monitors, even though they all use semiconductors. Understanding these supply mechanics helps explain why markets sometimes fail to quickly respond to changes in demand. But it also raises an intriguing question. If supply was so constrained, why didn't prices stay high forever? Prices aren't just numbers on a tag, they're messages. Every price in a market economy is essentially a conversation between buyers and sellers trying to answer a simple question: what is this thing actually worth? The PlayStation 5 launch perfectly illustrates this process of price discovery. When Sony released the PS5 in late 2020, they set the retail price at $499. But with production limited to 17.3 million units in the first year, compared to 20.2 million PS4s, there were far more buyers than consoles. Resellers initially listed PS5s for astronomical prices, some asking $1,000 or more. But something interesting happened. While some desperate buyers paid these prices, many refused. Resellers had to gradually lower their asking prices until they found the clearing price, the point where supply and demand reached equilibrium. By mid-2021, PS5 resale prices had stabilized around $700, $800, revealing the true market price given the supply constraints. This process of price discovery works like an auction in reverse. Instead of buyers bidding prices up, sellers test different price points until they find where the market clears. The GPU shortage followed a similar pattern, but with an interesting twist. Initially, prices rose until they found equilibrium around $2,000 for cards with a $500 MSRP. This wasn't price gouging, it was the market efficiently allocating scarce resources to those who valued them most, primarily cryptocurrency miners who could profit even at those prices. But when crypto prices crashed in 2022, this high-value use case disappeared. Suddenly, the market had to discover a new equilibrium based solely on gaming demand. This reveals something crucial about fair prices. They don't exist in any absolute sense. Consider the Dutch tulip mania of 1637, where single tulip bulbs sold for more than the price of a house. Were these prices unfair? From our modern perspective, obviously yes. But at that moment, those prices reflected what buyers were genuinely willing to pay. The key insight is that prices aren't just arbitrary numbers. They're a sophisticated communication system that helps markets allocate resources efficiently. When supply is constrained and demand spikes, higher prices serve three crucial functions. Understanding this process of price discovery helps explain why attempts to control prices often backfire. When retailers limited GPU purchases to one per customer at MSRP, they didn't eliminate the shortage. They just pushed price discovery into the secondary market. The real price of a GPU during the shortage was $2,000, whether that premium was captured by retailers, scalpers, or miners. As we'll see in our final section, the only thing that truly brings prices down is a fundamental change in either supply or demand. Markets are living systems that adapt and evolve. When prices spike dramatically, powerful forces begin working to restore balance, though not always as quickly as we'd like. The story of hand sanitizer during the COVID-19 pandemic perfectly illustrates this adaptation process. When pandemic fears first hit in early 2020, hand sanitizer demand exploded, with a staggering 1,400% increase between December 2019 and January 2020. Store shelves emptied overnight. Prices on secondary markets soared. It looked like a smaller version of the GPU shortage. High demand colliding with limited supply. But unlike complex semiconductors, hand sanitizer is relatively simple to produce. This meant that supply could adapt much more quickly. The FDA relaxed regulations to allow new manufacturers to enter the market. Distilleries switched from making spirits to producing sanitizer. Even local production initiatives sprang up, with some regions establishing their own manufacturing facilities. The result? Within months, hand sanitizer was widely available again at reasonable prices. The market had adapted through three key mechanisms. 1. New suppliers entered the market. 2. Existing producers increased capacity. 3. High prices incentivized more efficient distribution. This adaptation process follows a predictable pattern we see across markets. Initially, prices spike as demand outstrips supply. These high prices then act as a signal, attracting new production and encouraging conservation. Eventually, supply increases and demand moderates, bringing prices back to a new equilibrium. The GPU shortage followed this same pattern, just over a longer time frame due to the complexity of semiconductor manufacturing. When graphics cards were selling for 300% above MSRP, it sent a powerful signal to the market. Manufacturers began massive expansion projects. TSMC announced a $12 billion factory in Arizona, while Intel pledged $20 billion for new chip-making facilities. But semiconductor fabs take years to build, which is why the GPU shortage couldn't resolve quickly through supply expansion alone. Instead, the market found equilibrium through another mechanism: demand destruction. When cryptocurrency prices crashed in 2022, mining became unprofitable, eliminating a major source of GPU demand. Prices fell rapidly, demonstrating how markets can achieve balance from either direction: increase supply or decrease demand. This reveals something profound about how markets work. They're self-healing systems that tend toward equilibrium, but the speed of adaptation depends on the complexity of the product and the nature of the supply constraints. Hand sanitizer markets could adapt in months because production was relatively simple. GPU markets took years because semiconductor manufacturing is vastly more complex. Understanding this adaptation process helps explain why shortages eventually end without government intervention. High prices, while painful in the short term, serve as a crucial signal that incentivizes market adaptation. They're like a fever in the body, uncomfortable but necessary for healing. The market's ability to self-correct doesn't mean the process is painless or perfectly efficient, but it does suggest that artificial attempts to short-circuit this adaptation process through price controls or purchase limits often do more harm than good. They can actually extend shortages by preventing prices from sending the signals needed to stimulate new supply or moderate demand. Understanding supply and demand isn't just academic theory. It's a powerful lens for understanding why prices move the way they do in the real world. The great GPU shortage of 2020-2022 was just one example of these forces at work. By examining how markets respond to extreme conditions, we can better understand how they function in normal times. 1. Imagine a natural disaster suddenly destroyed half of all coffee plantations globally. How would you predict the immediate price impact? More importantly, how might the coffee market adapt over the following 3 to 5 years? 2. Here's a paradox to consider. Why do concert tickets sometimes sell for high prices on resale markets even when the venue isn't completely sold out? What does this tell us about market segmentation and price discrimination? 3. Let's say you're launching a new product. How would you use the principles of supply and demand to set your initial price? What market signals would you look for to know if your price was too high or too low? 4. We've talked about how markets tend toward equilibrium, but what forces might prevent prices from reaching their natural balance? Think about real-world factors like regulations, imperfect information, or market power. These questions don't have simple right or wrong answers. Instead, they invite you to apply the framework we've discussed to real-world situations. The more you practice thinking about markets this way, the better you'll understand the complex dance between supply, demand, and price discovery that shapes our economic world.